Every forbidden ritual from the ancient world, explained in a few minutes. 1. The Bacchanalia. The Bacchanalia were rites connected to Bacchus, the Roman form of Dionysus. To followers, they promised ecstasy, release, wine, music, and contact with a god who broke normal boundaries. To the Roman Senate, that was exactly the problem. The rituals became frightening because they were private, emotional, and difficult to supervise. Men and women, elites and commoners, night gatherings and secrecy all mixed together. Roman authorities claimed the meetings involved conspiracy and moral corruption. Some accusations may have been exaggerated, but the fear was real enough to trigger a crackdown. What made the Bacchanalia forbidden was not only what happened inside the ritual, it was what Rome imagined could happen there. A state built on order feared a god who taught people to lose control. 2. Child sacrifice at Carthage. Few ancient rituals are more debated or more disturbing than the sacrifices associated with Carthage. Greek and Roman sources accuse the Carthaginians of sacrificing children to powerful gods such as Baal-Hamon and Tanit. Archaeologists have found urns with burned remains in sacred precincts, though scholars still debate how to interpret all the evidence. The reason this ritual became so infamous is simple. It touched the deepest fear a society can imagine: parents offering their own children to divine power. To Carthage's enemies, it proved the city was monstrous. To modern historians, it remains a difficult mixture of archaeology, hostile propaganda, and possible ritual reality. That uncertainty makes the subject even darker. If the accusations were exaggerated, they show how empires demonize enemies. If they were true, they reveal how far people believed they had to go when negotiating with the gods. Now, before we continue, if you like understanding the darker side of history without wasting time, leave a like and subscribe to the channel. It helps this kind of content reach more people. Let's move forward. 3. The Scythian Blood Oath. The Scythians were remembered by Greek writers as fierce nomadic warriors of the steppe. Herodotus describes rituals involving blood, weapons, and oath-taking. Whether every detail is exact or filtered through Greek imagination, the image is powerful. A blood oath turns loyalty into something physical. It says that a promise is not only spoken, it enters the body. In warrior societies, that kind of ritual could bind men together more strongly than law. What made it frightening to outsiders was the sense that these people did not separate violence from sacred order. The oath was not paperwork. It was a wound made meaningful. 4. Aztec Heart Sacrifice. Aztec sacrifice is one of the most famous and most misunderstood ritual systems in history. It was not random cruelty. It belonged to a cosmic worldview where the gods had sacrificed for the world, and human beings owed life back to the forces that kept the sun moving. The heart became the center of the ritual because it represented life itself. Captives, war, temples, priests, and imperial power all came together in public ceremonies that shocked later Spanish observers. Those observers had their own reasons to emphasize horror, but the ritual importance of sacrifice was real. What makes this forbidden in the modern imagination is not only death, it is the idea that a civilization could organize beauty, astronomy, architecture, and terror into the same sacred system. 5. Maya bloodletting. Maya rulers practiced bloodletting as a way to communicate with gods and ancestors. Kings and queens pierced parts of the body and offered blood onto paper, which could be burned in ritual. The act was painful, but the meaning was political and cosmic. A ruler's blood proved connection to sacred forces. It transformed the body of the king or queen into a bridge between the human city and the invisible world. To outsiders, the ritual looks extreme. Inside its world, it was authority made visible. The ruler did not only command people, the ruler bled for the order of the universe. 6. The burial of servants with kings. In several ancient cultures, powerful rulers were buried with attendants, servants, guards, animals, or symbols of their household. Sometimes these burials suggest that people died to accompany the ruler into the next world. The logic was chilling. If a king needed service in life, perhaps he needed service after death. Royal power did not stop at the tomb. It tried to carry society's hierarchy into the afterlife. What makes this ritual so dark is how it turns loyalty into eternity. The tomb was not only a resting place, it could become a final palace, and some people were forced to enter it with the dead. 7. Gladiatorial funeral games. Before gladiatorial combat became massive entertainment, it was connected to funerary ritual. Bloodshed near the dead could be understood as honor, offering, or display of power. The disturbing detail is that death became part of memory. A wealthy family could honor a dead man by staging violence among the living. The crowd watched. The name of the deceased was elevated, and human bodies became ceremonial material. The ritual became forbidden to our moral instinct because it shows how easily grief can become spectacle. Rome learned to turn mourning into an arena. 8. The cult of Attis. The rites of Attis and Cybele carried an intensity that unsettled Roman observers. The myth involved passion, madness, mutilation, death, and renewal. Worship could include ecstatic music, mourning, and extreme bodily symbolism. Rome accepted the Great Mother, but never fully trusted the wildness surrounding her cult. The self-denial of some priests seemed to violate Roman ideals of masculine discipline and civic restraint. What made the ritual frightening was that it asked worshippers not only to believe a myth, but to enter its wound. The god's suffering became something the body could imitate. 9. The oracle rites of the dead. Across the ancient world, people sought messages from the dead through caves, pits, temples, dreams, and ritual descent. These rites were often treated with fear because they crossed a boundary most societies guarded carefully. The dead were not simply absent. They could be powerful, restless, wise, or dangerous. To call them was to risk bringing back more than an answer. Necromantic rites became forbidden because they turned grief into contact. A living person standing at the edge of the underworld was asking the dark to speak. 10. The Roman Devotio. The Roman ritual of devotio involved a commander dedicating himself and the enemy to the gods of the underworld in exchange for victory. It was not ordinary bravery. It was sacred self-destruction. In the stories preserved by Roman tradition, a general could ride into death after offering his life as a weapon for the state. His body became the price of divine favor. What makes devotio so powerful is that Rome turned sacrifice into military strategy. The commander did not simply die for his army. He made himself a ritual offering, dragging the enemy into the curse with him. 10 forbidden rituals, 10 different doors into the ancient mind. Some were banned by states. Some were condemned by enemies. Some survived only as terrifying fragments in hostile accounts. But all of them reveal the same truth. Ancient people did not see ritual as decoration. They saw it as a way to touch power. And when human beings believe power lives behind blood, death, ecstasy, and the underworld, the sacred can become more frightening than war. What connects these rituals is not only violence or secrecy. It is the belief that the visible world was never enough. Ancient people looked at storms, harvests, birth, death, victory, disease, and the movement of the stars, and they believed hidden powers were operating behind everything. Ritual was the method for reaching those powers. Sometimes that meant music and prayer. Sometimes it meant blood, pain, silence, or terror. That is why forbidden rituals were so frightening to rulers. A ritual creates loyalty that does not always pass through the state. People who gather in secret, bleed together, mourn together, or believe they have touched a god together can become harder to govern. The ritual gives them another authority, another language, and another fear. There is also something uncomfortable about how organized many of these practices were. They were not always the acts of isolated fanatics. They could belong to cities, temples, kings, armies, and respected families. That means the darkest rituals of the ancient world were not outside civilization. Many of them were built into civilization itself. There is another layer to these rituals that is easy to miss. Many of them were not considered forbidden by the people practicing them. They became forbidden when another authority looked at them and saw danger. That authority might be a senate, a conquering empire, a new religion, or a later historian trying to describe an enemy. This means every forbidden ritual has two stories. The first is the story from inside, where the ritual might mean purification, protection, courage, fertility, victory, mourning, or contact with the divine. The second is the story from outside, where the same act becomes barbaric, criminal, demonic, or politically threatening. That gap matters. Ancient history is full of rituals we know mainly through the words of people who hated them. Sometimes those descriptions preserve real horror. Sometimes they preserve propaganda. Often they preserve both at the same time. So when we look at these practices, the question is not only what happened. The question is who had the power to define what happened. A ritual can be sacred to one group and unforgivable to another. That is why the ancient world is so difficult and so fascinating. It forces us to look at fear from both sides of the altar. There is also a reason these stories work so strongly on modern audiences. They reveal a world where people were willing to make the body part of belief. Pain was not always seen as meaningless. Blood could become a message. Death could become a transaction. Ecstasy could become proof that the divine had entered the room. That does not make the rituals less disturbing. It makes them more human and more difficult. People were not simply cruel because they lacked modern knowledge. They were trying to survive drought, war, infertility, plague, defeat, grief, and uncertainty with the tools their cultures gave them. Sometimes those tools were beautiful. Sometimes they were terrifying. And that is the uncomfortable lesson. The ancient world was not divided between civilized people and monstrous rituals. The same societies that built temples, poetry, law, calendars, and cities could also build ceremonies that demanded suffering. The sacred and the brutal often stood closer together than we want to believe. If this video helped you understand the darker side of ancient ritual, share it with someone who loves lost history. Leave a like and subscribe for more stories from the past. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.